All right. Hello. Okay. Welcome to Deeper Than Dogma. We didn't have a show last week because I was on vacation. I apologize for that, but I have a life. I'm sorry. Um,
Thank you for
but
not blaming me.
and it was Xbox's fault because he didn't actually throw a show. But tonight we are going to be kind of switching gears again here when we're talking about gender. Now, I really look forward to discussions like this one because it's honestly a topic I have not given much thought to. Yeah, I have my opinions on it, but honestly, I've not actually researched it that much. With some of the stuff that's coming out now in like the news with Bruce Jenner there, topics relating to gender roles and what does it mean to be a man or a woman have come up again in these conversations. Now, I know this is a potentially be a huge topic and go down many different paths of the conversation, so I'm going to do my best to try to keep this relatively streamlined, but I count on my panel of experts and overall smarter than me people to kind of keep it on track. So, I mean, I got Benny Ocean, Eve Real, Floyd FP here tonight, as well as um, Jennifer, I can't remember, Gordon, sorry, Francis Roy, Ozymandias, and Xbox. And looking forward to having a good talk here. Now, this is Benny. You're one of the people that kind of brought up this idea for this topic tonight. Um, can you maybe go into just a little bit more detail again, because I made you do this in the pre-show, to ideally what it is that we are going to be kind of talking about here and kind of addressing?
Yeah. Well, the main thing is to try to. It's something that I've noticed that we just are not all that experienced at talking about. It's something that's important, but something that we're maybe not really good at because we haven't done it that much. And so maybe we ought to try. And the because the Bruce slash Caitlyn Jenner thing has been in the news so much this week that it's a topical. It's something that's important. It's always important, but it's especially on people's minds right now. And the concept that I think we started out with was what does manhood mean? Or we could alternatively talk about womanhood. What does it mean to be a man, or what does it mean to be a woman? Let's just start with manhood. There are things like, a real man does this. A real man plays sports, and a real man keeps his word. A real man is courageous. A real man is this. A real man is that. So there are these kinds of I don't want to say too much in the intro, but it's interesting when we say things like a real man is courageous or a real man keeps his word, because some of those characteristics, many of those things that we would want to ascribe to a real man, we would also hope that women would carry those characteristics as well. We would hope that a woman would be courageous. We would hope that a woman would keep her word, but those aren't things that are labeled as being womanly. So this is just an example. So something that I think is important is how much of gender is just is a kind of a performance that we make without really realizing we're doing it. But society is telling us every day of our lives what we ought to be like, how we ought to behave, who we ought to be. And so this ends up being men end up acting like men. They're not just men being men. They're men acting like men, act like a man. Okay, I'm acting like a man, So
Is that the question? Is that kind of the question? Is like what?
there
What
are a
is
lot
it?
of different questions, but I think
What
that's
does
one
it
of them.
act like a man?
Sure. So that's enough for now.
Can I jump in? I think it would be useful if we can start off clarifying a little bit what we're talking about. When we talk about gender, gender is a very misused word, and it can mean a lot of things. It is frequently misused for the word sex. Gender and sex are not the same thing. What you're referring to are gender roles. There's also gender identity, so on and so forth. What they mean is the distinction between conceptual masculinity and conceptual femininity that derived through history. I think it would be very helpful to us if everyone can remember that when we're talking about sex, how a person's body is, that we use that word, and when we're talking about gender roles, to actually use the term gender roles. This, by the way, is a term that most feminists will be nodding their head with.
Well, can we clarify on that? That maybe what does gender mean? Is sexuality kind of referring to genetics or your body? What does
Well,
gender refer to?
well, sexuality is a different thing than sex as well, because
Sure.
sex, like your sex characteristics are your, like you have your primary and your secondary sex characteristics, which are, your penis, breasts, blah 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 blah. And then you have, sexuality, which is pretty much basically in a grand scheme of things who you're attracted to. So, you have women who are attracted to women, women who are attracted to men, women who are attracted to trans, and men to men, men to women, men to trans, whatever. There's all kinds of different sexualities, and it has nothing to do with the sex of the person.
Yeah, because there's obviously a distinction between like a gay man liking a man and a transgender person, like right, like there's a definite difference in the two.
Yeah. So
Yeah, go ahead, Ozzy.
sorry, I'm just going to clarify the territory here. So it sounds like we're talking about we're distinguishing between three things. The biological sex, like if I work in a factory and you have to sex the chickens, you have to find out which ones are the males and the females. We're sexing them. We're just looking at the organs, or we're concerned with their genetic makeup or something. That's a biological fact, presumably. Although there are some fairly extreme radical feminists who would dispute that. But the idea is that sex is sort of a biological thing. Gender identity and gender roles, that is something that is keys off of sex, presumably, but is largely a cultural concept, a cultural artifact. And then there's the last thing that Jennifer was just talking about, sexuality, or what we might ordinarily think of as orientation, sexual orientation, who you're attracted to, and ordinarily we think that these things all go together. If you are sex M, then you are male, and a man and masculine, and therefore you're supposed to love and be attracted to people of the opposite sex, F, female, right? And these things traditionally are supposed to all go together nicely and tidily, but of course we know the world is much more messy and complicated than that. So anyway, that's just sort of lay out the territory, those three concepts that we can tease apart. Sorry, Jennifer, I think I cut you off there.
Oh no, you pretty much summed exactly what I was going to say anyway. So it's.
Well, I also want to say I guarantee we're going to get some things wrong today, and we're going to say some things that could offend people. We'll probably do it by accident. If anyone is doing stuff like that on purpose, I would suggest that Sokka remove them. And we're not trying to have any kind of angry or we're not trying to have a big emotional showdown. We're trying to talk things over and hopefully learn from one another.
And we're not trying to define the other.
But things like the calling Bruce or Caitlin by the wrong name or using the wrong pronouns, that's just going to happen sometimes. People make those kind of mistakes, and usually it's an innocent mistake. And so just want to throw that out there.
It's one of the things that I was kind of talking about with Xbox before we started the hangout was the concept of feminine or masculine labels. He, she, his, hers, him, whatever. Now, how do those relate to gender or to sex? So in the case of let's say someone like Bruce Jenner there, that gender-wise recognize himself as a woman, should we call them her or she or whatever there is? That where does the gender roles tie into the labels that we give to people?
Yeah, we kind of came up with if it's that case where all of a sudden you change from saying his car and now you're saying her car, it seems like you're just referring definitionally to something, not to an actual something.
Seems like a lot of gender roles are centered around child rearing. That what defines a certain role is how the children are raised, and I think a lot of people think, well, females are more loving and cherishing and more attentive towards children, so they take on the role of nurturing the children more, where the manly role is basically just to bring home the bacon, so to speak. Just to bring home the money and to support the family. But it seems like a lot of these gender roles are defined about how children are raised.
Can I add something? I tend to really like to go to the fundamentals when it's possible. And after giving a certain amount of thought, here's where I believe on the subject. First of all, when we're talking about someone's gender role, we first must talk about the average. The average human at some point in history clearly divided into, clearly had two sexes, male and female. Both had behaviors that were typical of that kind of body before even the mind was fully developed. Certain sexes created certain behaviors. So when we ask a question is, what is masculinity? What is femininity? What we're frequently asking, if we think about the question, is those that we refer to as being male or those that we think of as being female tend to embody certain traits more often than not. And then from that point on, what happens is humans are very lazy thinkers. We like to group things into very simple aggregates, make the ideas simple because it's just easier for our human brain to do. At some point from there developed a sense of men do this, women do that. There are always exceptions, but we got into that habit. And that habit eventually, I believe, over time became part of culture, that men are this way, that women are that way, and that a lot of this stuff is just a history of mental laziness.
Yeah, that's an interesting
Sure.
point. Yeah, I mean, there were naturally feminine or masculine or feminine behaviors that we evolved sexual dimorphism, right? Sexual dimorphism means morphology refers to in biology the way something, the shape of something, the way it looks. So I mean, if you hear like in a superhero movie, something like morphing, it means changing shape, right? That's what they mean when they say that. So dimorphism, they're talking about two different morphologies, two different shapes. So you don't see in some animals a sexual dimorphism. You don't see differences like your cats, your house cats. Probably you can't tell them apart. I mean, unless you look up close. And so the reason, I mean, we have sexual selection and different mating patterns basically have created the types of body shapes that we have now. And so there have been, what this means is that men and women have had these differences in behavior and accentuated by our sexual selection for many, many generations. So it's not like we just invented this, but then once it goes into the media, once it becomes, you have fashion magazines and you have men's health magazines and you have, this is what you ought to be. And there's this sort of idealized male and the idealized female. And if you don't fall into this perfect idea of what it means to be a woman, then there's something wrong with you, because you don't fit the ideal. But really, the ideal is just an ideal. Not many people are going to fit an ideal because it's an ideal,
Sure.
And it's also being used to sell things. So I mean, people ought to realize that, it's not necessarily really who you ought to be or who you need to be, but it's what the media has found useful to sell you shit, basically.
Does it stretch it to an arbitrariness? Like there may be something at the foundation, but is that kind of what you're saying? Like there's an extreme form of it?
I think that there are genetic differences between males and females in general, but
Sure.
But we do push it too far. We do when we say. So I wonder about this, and this is something we could talk about. But with trans people, I mean, if you're someone who is let's say you're born female, but this female person doesn't feel like what they think their society is showing them what femininity is. I mean, they see the women in the pretty dresses, and all they want to do is get married and have a bunch of kids and please their husband and all this kind of stuff. and you have someone born, genetically female, but they don't feel that way. They say, you know what, I don't identify with these feminine characteristics. I identify more with those male characteristics. Those the things that we identify with manhood fit me more. So maybe that's what I am. I mean, in a world where it's a simple binary, where if you don't fit the one, well, then you must be the other, right? But
yeah, it seems like a desire for black and white thinking. It's a simple. You're the one or the other. There's no in between, and how your biology is. Well, there you go. There's the role, and get to it. And again, yeah, it makes things very simple.
I like the way Francis said it. Intellectual laziness. I liked how you worded that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a 6-year-old son, like probably most of you guys know. He hates pink. Now, I mean, I don't think that I raised him to hate pink or anything like that, but it's just that from the experience that he has at school, from from what he sees, that pink is a female color. He wants nothing to do with it. And just something as simple as that starts laying out this groundwork where we start labeling these things as more female or more male or whatever. And is this even necessary? Is the idea to separate between genders? Is this something that we need to constantly encourage? Do we have to keep these things in place, because they do seem kind of arbitrary?
Yeah, I told you earlier. My wife had smacked me when we got an ATM card. I ordered a pink one. And it got me thinking about that. It was like, well, what is actually wrong with me having a pink card? Why should that even matter to me?
Well, what's funny is because like hundreds of years ago, pink was actually societally considered a male color.
That's right.
So the same with purple. Purple was associated with royalty, but now they're more associated with the feminine, as a feminine quality or a feminine color to have on. So
it's a good example, yeah.
But I mean, I spent the last week on vacation, and while I was on vacation, I got to hang around with my niece, who's the same age as my son, and it's amazing just the difference that we expose even children to at a young age. My son is a boy, he plays in the mud, gets in trouble, does really stupid things, and my niece is a princess, and. Why? I mean, it's. That's
the way my son's 18 and has huge muscles and wears some of that, and like the same thing with my daughters. They're like I see the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's earlier when we were talking, I said there are these three things. There's sort of your biological sex, which of course is, as others have said already here, this is conditioned by evolution. Sexual dimorphism is a fact in our species. I mean, it's a fact in all of the ape species. I mean, you look at a gorilla, the sexual dimorphism between a male and a female gorilla is huge. It's much less pronounced, the sexual dimorphism in chimpanzees, and it's very, very much less pronounced in our species. But there's still some sexual dimorphism. Men typically are bigger and heavier and stronger than females. We have statistically larger teeth. There's all kinds of little differences, big and small differences between the sexes. That is just a biological fact. And it's also a biological fact and a psychological fact that our psychosexual makeup orientation is a product of evolution. So it's not a coincidence that most people are going to be attracted to the opposite sex, because there's a biological reproductive imperative that necessitates that. Any species that just wasn't particularly concerned with reproduction or wasn't particularly attracted to the opposite sex, which is the sex with which they could reproduce, that species would not fare very well. So that's just going to happen. And gender roles arise as idealizations, sort of stereotypical extrapolations of some of these differences. So what's a man? A manly man is a big, tall, strapping fellow with broad, square shoulders and a strong jawline and an impressive barrel chest and big biceps and stuff like that, right? And well, what's a womanly woman? Well, a womanly woman has all of the primary and secondary sexual features that are associated with being the sex female, right? And all of the psychosexual behaviors that go with that. So I think that the gender roles actually line up fairly nicely with our biology, start from our biology, and then culture just adds on these layers and layers and layers on top of that. I mean, what does a man's suit look like? A man's suit. I mean, look at a dress jacket, right? I mean, it's essentially got epaulets. It's all about creating this sort of broad-shouldered look, right? And what's an evening gown for a woman, right? A man goes out in a suit and a dinner jacket. He's got something that makes him look big and broad-shouldered and barrel-chested. And what's a woman wearing? She's wearing, presumably something that's more form-fitting, that is revealing of those features of her femaleness, right? Literally her female sex. So these things have a tendency to line up, and what ends up happening is reification happens. Sex, I think, is real, but as a consequence of that being real, people think, well, all these other things, where there's a lot of play, there's a lot of wiggle room, there's a spectrum, there's a continuum where people find themselves along with respect to who they're attracted to and how female they feel and what they like about femaleness and maleness. All of that is kind of sloppy, right? People are going to tend to cluster around their bodily sexuality or bodily sex, but they're not all going to be that way. There's going to be this continuum. But people reify, and through the kind of lazy thinking that Francis was talking about, the simplistic black and white thinking that Floyd was talking about, people want this to be very tidy. And there are certain outlooks on reality that I think conduce to making a person reify and oversimplify the complexity that we find in the biological and the social world. If you believe that the world was created by a god and he created the animals a certain way and he created the male and female and stuff like that, then there's a good chance that you're going to think that the gender roles and the sexual orientations that we ordinarily map on to sex, that those too are innate and normative and are supposed to be that way, and then you're doing something unnatural and unwholesome. You're deviating from your nature. You are doing something unwholesome and unnatural. You're violating the very moral order when you don't occupy the gender role or the sexual orientation that is normally associated with that sex. And I think that causes enormous problems. And we now live in a world where people, I think, are starting to realize that these things can be uncoupled and can be uncoupled quite harmlessly. Yeah, go ahead, Francis.
And part of the reason for that, I'm convinced, is because we live in a technological age where electricity and petroleum has replaced muscle power, and where also we now live in a communication age. So if we're talking about gender roles, the roles were originally developed. Well, I won't even go so far as to say developed. They emerged as byproducts of our bodies, because when a male did this and a female did that, the whole ensemble worked better. Both had something to bring to the party in a given environment, in a given context. We now live in a different context where cars replace legs, where power lifters replace arms, where communication has become the primary influencing factor, whereas before it was all meat. It was what we could produce from our own energy.
Sure.
So now when we have this, suddenly we have women who are capable of doing all that is expected of a man, if not with their body, then with a machine. And we have men who are now charged with communicating to large groups of people, as once might have been a woman. Yeah. So this is it's the new context that creates a lot of the divisions, I think.
Yeah, do we kind of get into that fear of cars are going to replace all the horses, now the horses are going to be out of jobs kind of thinking? Yeah.
I always found it funny because, well, first off, I want to go back to the whole pronoun usage. I just want to throw a quick comment out there. Basically, my philosophy on that is, unless you're giving someone a DNA test to find out their biological sex, it's always better just to call them what they prefer to be called, him or her. If they present as female, call them her and use she, and they present as male.
Especially if you want stability, right?
Yeah, exactly. There are some people out there who will do that just to be, rude for the simple way of putting it. But so yeah, we were crap. I forgot what the second thing I was going to talk about. Anyway, go on.
Could I say something to that? I think that it's a little different than that. I think when people do that, if a person self-identifies as female, but was born with the biological sex male, a lot of people will insist on using the male pronoun, right? Even though it gives offense, right? And I don't mean to suggest that it's not disrespectful. I think it's extremely disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that when people do that, a lot of the time they are in fact trying to be disrespectful. They're being dicks, right? And I know someone's going to pick up on the fact that I mentioned dick, and that is an insult,
Freudian slip.
And I wanted to reel it in actually as I said it. So yeah, it's funny actually how genitalia, both male and female, get associated with all kinds of bad behavior.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and if
you're
a dick,
dicks and cunts, and
if you're a dick versus a
asshole,
pussy, if you're a pussy, it's like saying you're weak, right? And if you're a dick, you're a jerk, but you're not weak.
Yeah.
You're jabbing someone. Or...
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, but it's not like male genitalia is positive, and like because we'll say like, oh, grow a pair, that's a good thing, right? And obviously you should grow a pair, right? That will make you. That makes you thick-skinned and tough and stuff like that, and that's obviously a good thing, right? Whereas a pussy, that's a terrible thing to be, right? But I mean, if someone calls you a prick, that's not a good thing either, right? So, so that landscape, that linguistic landscape, is messy. But just to get back to my point, I think that when people insist on using a gender identifier contrary to what a person would like to be referred as, I don't think they're not always doing it to be rude. They're not always doing it to be disrespectful. I think sometimes it's because people think, as I was saying earlier, that there's a natural order to things. And if you're a trans person and you were born male and you now identify as female, they think that you're perverting the moral order. You are violating naturalness. You're just doing something terribly unnatural, terribly unwholesome. And for them to go along with it, right, is asking them to be complicit and to condone it. And for some people, they just can't. For them, this is a moral issue, and it has nothing to do with manners. And they think it's ill-mannered of you to ask them, and that's how they see it. So I'm not trying to defend it. I'm trying to explain it. Why some people just seem so perversely persistent in being disrespectful this way. And I think it is disrespectful, but it isn't. I don't think it's always done out of disrespect. It is often done out of disrespect, though. Sometimes deliberately to offend, sometimes, but not always.
Yeah, some are saying that it offends them that you even ask them to call them the other thing, like you said, the moral issue. Yeah.
I can use an example from my own life. Can I just real quick? I can use an example from my own life. Is that about 10 years ago, I'd had no experience with trans people at all. I mean, I'm sure I'd seen them on the street and not known who they were, but I was in a little suburb, not a huge population, and I just didn't notice. I knew a few gay people. I mean, it's a pretty conservative neighborhood, so I just didn't know any trans people. And the first real exposure I had was a guy that I worked with telling me about this his roommate who was male. I mean, this is the way this was described to me. But this person liked to live as female, and he referred to his male roommate as her, and he the way he presented it, he made it sound like a kind of charade, And so then when I meet the roommate, it's like, am I expected to partake in this charade with you, because of the way that it was described to me? So I could only think of, I missed that question. I'm sorry.
The well was poisoned.
Oh, the well was poisoned, yeah. And so I always, I only met this person once. I had no relationship with this person. But the way that I was introduced and just the context of it made me think this is a male who's playing as female. It's a kind of just a thing they're doing, whatever. But then there was another time where I actually had a trans roommate, a F to M trans roommate. And so this person was male the whole time I knew them, and I would have never thought to call him anything other than him, right? Because this was just a man who happened to have been born female, looked male, wasn't traditionally masculine, was small in frame, which you'd expect from someone who started out their life as a woman, but seemed like a guy, So some of it is honest, I think. I would have probably thought of the first person as male, even though they would have wanted to be thought of as female, where the other person I would have thought of as male because of the context.
Sure.
I think Eve had something, and
Yeah, sorry. No, Jen actually was going to catch up on something. She there, and then I think Ozzy wanted to add just onto that as well.
No, Eve can go ahead. Like I said, I'm taking notes now, so I don't forget.
It's all right. I've done kind of lost my.
All right, Ozzy, do you want to add onto that?
Actually, I had an anecdote similar to Benny's, but I'd rather hear what Jennifer has to say. You can wait.
Oh, I was so what I was going to say before is that and again, I'm always late to the conversation because we've kind of passed on that topic, but it's always funny because there are people out there who will look at me and be like, okay, well, they don't know, like they'll just assume that I'm female, and there are other people who can pick it out for some reason, and it's these, when I tell people, they're like, it seems like they kind of focus on those masculine traits, and they try to find them in me. So when I come out to someone, it almost becomes like this kind of goal of theirs to kind of, notice, so you do have a bit of a broader chin, or broader shoulders, or whatever the case, and that's fine. I don't mind that, but there are a lot of people out there who say that I'm doing this, like the way I look now is because I'm trying to over-feminize my appearance to try to portray this role, and it's not really that way, because I do keep a lot of my masculine traits, and I'm open about them. I don't sit here and say, oh, well, no, I can no longer watch MMA because that's a man's sport or something stupid like that. But no, I love MMA. I love watching UFC and all that good stuff. I like watching football.
Well, I find myself avoiding those terms. Like if I come across, it's usually a female that's going through the male that does start to show masculine, or is so difficult to just tell by look, that for some reason I avoid using the pronouns like that, and I'm aware that I do.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing though. It's like for someone to accuse me of oh, well, I've even been accused, well, you're gay and you want to attract men, so therefore that's why you're doing this, and it's not that at all, because I could easily go after gay men and attract men that way. It's not.
Does attractiveness to yourself play a role in it?
That is the only reason why I do what I
okay.
do. It's all for me, and people don't understand that. It's the fact that that I've learned that it's better for me to be happy with who I am, rather than conforming to the gender stereotype or the gender roles that are laid out for me.
Absolutely.
Just because
that's
of
something
how
I can
I was born.
identify. I don't see how people don't identify with making yourself happy or seeing yourself attractive. Like, so I get what you're saying. So
the idea of these gender roles here, I think we kind of touched on this a little bit. The idea of what does it mean to be masculine, what does it mean to be feminine. Do you think that a point that Francis brought up is that the age that we live in, that cars have replaced the feet, and whatever there is there still a need for gender roles? Or should we be kind of steering away from this these ideas, like this whole gender binary idea?
Certain areas it seems like we should, but I don't think overall. I don't see that anyway. Go ahead, Ozzy. I'm sorry.
Well, the whole sexual dimorphism thing happens because, first of all, we have to remember that sex differences in our species, predate our species, right? I mean, we are the descendants of earlier hominids, and those sex differences were already there. In fact, if you look in the Homo lineage, if you go further back, sex size dimorphism, for instance, is even more pronounced than in our species, than in modern day humans. And gender roles, I think, would have had a lot to do with the social division of labor, right? I mean, females, of course, bear the young. They get pregnant and they have to nurse the young and give birth to them and stuff like that. So obviously their association with the offspring is greater, and there's more direct parental investment. A male really is can be a sperm donor and then take off, right? But a female's parental investment in her offspring is absolutely huge, right? And so consequently, the psychosocial or the sexual psychology of men and women is going to be very different. So quite apart from things like labor and work and stuff like that, those the kinds of differences that might have resulted from our biological makeup being different and in response to evolutionary pressures in the way of life, our sexual psychology has been conditioned by evolution, right? I mean, we often hear that men are shallow because men really are easily visually aroused, right? I mean, that's why visual video porn appeals so much more to men than to women. Not that women don't like it, but I mean, the audience of men for this stuff, the consumption of this by men, is so much greater than women.
Amen.
And it's men are just very, very easily aroused through the eye, and women not as much. And so this gives rise to this idea that men are shallow. Men are only interested in looks. Well, men are interested in looks. They're certainly aroused by looks. And so it's not a coincidence. It's not an accident that men seem shallow this way. This is just part of their psychosexual makeup. Women, of course, because they are not just sperm donors, they're not just ovum donors. They actually have to bear the young and give and give birth to them and then nurse them. Otherwise, the infant would just die. The kinds of things that they find attractive in the opposite sex involve a lot of other things, like a man's capacities. Who the sperm donor is going to be matters, and it's not just his looks, it's not just his physical strength, but it's his social standing, his power, his ability to command resources, his loyalty. And so consequently, this gives rise to the idea that women are gold diggers, because a lot of women are very aroused by men who have wealth, who have power, who have prestige, who have social standing, right? So we get all these stereotypes and we condemn the hell out of each other for things that I think are just part of our biological nature. So I think that even though the selective pressures that gave rise to this are largely gone in the modern world, we are stuck with the psychosexual makeup that we have. That's not going to go away, right? That could go away over millennia, but it's not going to go away in the next few generations. And I don't think it matters how we organize society.
It seems like a lot of those issues rise when the society does take some of those roles to the extremes.
Yeah, and to the extent that our modern day world relaxes the selective pressures that gave rise to the kind of sexual size dimorphism that we find and the psychosexual dynamics that we have, it can seem kind of maladaptive to be playing along with these gender roles and playing into these gender roles. But nevertheless, masculinity and femininity are ideals. They are idealizations, and I think it's very hard for us to not be caught up in them. So I think there's certain trappings of masculinity and femininity that I think are just silly and preposterous that we can get rid of. I mean, I like what high heels does for a woman's shape. I love what it does for her calves and her buttocks and her breasts and how it just all aligns her shape. Right? It accentuates those secondary sexual characteristics. But we can all appreciate that walking around in high heels is just not good for you. It's just not good for your back, right? A tight skirt might look great and all that, but if you have to mince around all day, that's kind of an impractical thing, right? So it seems to me that there are layered social aspects of masculinity and sexuality and femininity in our sexuality that we could, if we want to, get rid of that.
Do you
But I
not
don't
see that
think.
as like peacocking, like an ingrained thing? Is that I know we find external things like to make the shoe and to make it look or the skirt to look a certain way, but is it? I see a mix of like the peacocking thing or trying to attract the other sex in these ways.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's such a thing as sexual selection, right? I mean, and it's very powerful in our species. I mean, this is a fact that a lot of men complain about, right? I mean, women usually choose the mate, right? Men seem sort of desperate to get their hands on whomever they can, but ultimately, if you're a man and you get married, chances are she chose you, and you went along with it, right? Because most women, for most women, sex is available whenever they want. A woman really has to be pretty darn unattractive not to be able to have sex whenever she wishes, right? Um, Men really are a lot more goatish, I think. It's not that women aren't as lusty; it's that women are in a position to pick and choose in a way that most men can't. Right? I mean, you almost have to look like Brad Pitt to be able to do what almost any woman can do, and just get laid anytime you want, right? Um,
Yeah, sure.
so
Yeah. So
these are real differences in our psychosexual makeup, and a lot of it has to do with our biology. So I think that given that we have the biology that we have, some things I think we can completely transform within the concept of masculinity and femininity. We could transform that. We can get rid of a lot of nonsense. But some of this, I think, is just going to stay. Isn't
Sure.
going to isn't going to go. I don't think it's all socially constructed and
Yeah.
malleable. I don't think human nature is infinitely malleable this way, as some people think.
Can I say something in regards to, well, kind of what Ozzy's been talking about, and then earlier he mentioned, that evolution has played a role in our sexuality and everything. And I was just wanting, I had put it in the side chat, but no one really answered, so I'm not sure what y'all's thoughts are on this, but I was wondering if perhaps homosexuality and bisexuality is also a byproduct of evolution, because I know that you had mentioned, Ozzy, that with us needing to reproduce, evolution played that role of us being attracted to the opposite sex. But I also know that in certain ape species, sex is not, or fondling is not just for reproduction, it's also for bonding. And so I was wondering you guys' thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, bonobo chimps, just to
Bonobos are
quickly
famous
answer,
for
yeah,
that.
bonobo chimps are sort of famous for easing social tensions through sexuality, and they do it with the opposite sex, and they do it with the same sex. They literally masturbate one another and essentially perform oral sex on one another and other sexual acts, copulating, heterosexually and homosexually. So nothing I've said so far should be construed as suggesting that the sole adaptive function of sexuality is reproduction. That's just the one that is relevant to the perpetuation of the species, or rather, I should say, is most relevant to differential reproductive success and the success of the species. But it's not the only factor, not by a long way. And we have to understand that sexual attractiveness, what you're sexually attracted to, is going to be along a spectrum. I mean, there are some people for whom big boobs and a big butt and a narrow waist is really that's huge. I mean, there's some men for whom that is just a huge thing. That's an important variable in their sexuality. They have a hard time getting aroused without seeing that or having that at their disposal in a sex partner. Where there are others for whom no, they kind of prefer a more juvenile figure that might be a little bit more androgynous and less curvaceous and less stereotypically female. Right, people are going to follow along a continuum, and that can go all the way to
We're a big girl.
I like someone who looks like a man. In fact, I like men. Right, that can be. Someone's going to quote mine that. So that's what's going to happen, right? You're going to have this spectrum. Now, most people are going to tend towards what you would expect natural selection to produce, but there's this spectrum, right? And selective pressures are not so harsh that only people who like the opposite sex are going to get to have surviving offspring. Right? I mean, and then there are people who are like, well, yeah, I like all kinds of body types. right? And I can be attracted to this body type and that body type, and so you're going to get people who are attracted to only their sex and only a certain look within their sex, within the opposite sex. Some people who are only attracted to the same sex. Some people who are going to be attracted to either sex. We would expect the majority to be attracted to the opposite sex, but we shouldn't expect that this has to be for everybody.
Yeah, I was talking
So I
with my
think
daughter
I
the other
think
day about that.
bisexuality is perfectly normal. It's part of the spectrum, the continuum of human sexuality.
I talked to my daughter about that the other day. She was asking me something. It got on to like there's guys that are attractive to me, but there's a difference between being attracted that way and being attracted that I want to touch their penis kind of thing. Like I'm sexually attracted to them.
1 second, sorry, X. Francis, did you want to add something into that as well?
Please.
Oh, you're still there. Okay, I guess I have to wait for a second.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
Oh, no.
I'm not used to the whole mute unmute thing. When the conversation originally came up, there's a question that I often used to wonder was, is homosexuality part of evolution's grand scheme in the sense to that the species is willfully limiting itself to live within certain environmental constraints? Richard Dawkins did a little bit on that, and his answer was no, because the gene thinks at a genes level and not at a species level.
Sure.
So it was just an interesting little bit that other people might have wondered.
Yeah, kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks. And if you don't do that, nothing will stick.
Yeah.
Why do you think Muslim cultures treat their women, the way they do, where they keep them covered up? They don't want them to have educations. They just want them to fit into the role as a mother and not have any occupation and not even drive a car.
May I speak to that?
Sure.
Sure.
I'm not an expert on these cultures, but what I'd like to point out is a few things. First, a lot of what we hear is simply not true. Women can drive cars. Women can leave the houses, even in Saudi Arabia. This is a common thing. The reason why they don't is part of it is for the same reason that you and I don't walk naked down the street or down the mall. It's quote-unquote just not done. These are based on religious strictures, and in Saudi Arabia, the law is religiously based, but these laws apply wherever the religion applies. That includes England and Canada and the United States and where have you. Another thing to keep in mind is that these are not simply how women are being treated, but how people are being treated. All the prescriptions to men, to women, also involve prescriptions for men. So the reason that a woman doesn't typically drive is because it's expected that a man will take the duty of driving her. Why? Because this either family or blood-related man is charged with defending her. Now, some places take it to an extreme, especially I'm thinking of smaller tribal areas in Afghanistan, for example, is what we often think of. Well, the notion is that a woman inside a house is less likely to catch a bullet. And so it's a man's job to go out there and brave the bullets and bring home the bacon, so to speak. So whenever we talk about sex roles or gender roles, it's important to remember that they don't apply to just one in isolation, but that they apply to both. And 9 times out of 10, they are a coordinated effort that was derived from the past efforts of what helped us survive. Now, you throw on culture, you throw on religion, you throw in local mores and traditions, and you can start to get a sense of how these things weed together. But these very same principles also apply in North America, in the UK, in every part of the world.
Yeah, it's funny because, okay, so when I was growing up, I didn't really have much of an opportunity to explore my sexuality of dating men. I was living as a male, and it was expected of me to religiously and pretty much socially to date women. So for the most of up until probably 22 years old, I dated women. The funny thing is that when I started dating men, and after my transition, I had a boyfriend who I don't know if it was just because he was old-fashioned or not, but he always wanted to walk on a certain side of the sidewalk, and he always wanted to sleep on a certain side of the bed. And I found out later, the reasons why he wanted to do that, because he walked, on the sidewalk closest to the vehicles. So if a vehicle jumped the curb, he would be the one taking the majority of the hit, whatever, or getting splashed by water or whatever. I don't know. It seems silly to me. The same thing with the bed is that if there was an intruder, he would be first towards the closest towards the doors, so that way
Sure.
he'd be protective of me.
I've done that my
were
whole life, by the way.
Yeah.
That was pickled into me as a boy and as a young man, and to this day, I will walk on the outside on the sidewalk.
Sure. I do that.
Yes,
Mhm.
but these
Yeah, I
are
mean
things.
it's subconscious. I mean I do that with my
Yeah.
I even
yeah,
do that with my kid. Like if we're walking on the street, I always make sure he's I'm the one walking beside the road. It's
Absolutely.
But
know.
see, these are concepts that I was completely unfamiliar with. I've never had anyone. I don't know. It's because I've never had anyone explain it to me, or I've never had anyone do that for me. But it's just something I never noticed. But when I thought about it, I'm like, well, yeah, that's just kind of. I guess it makes sense, but like, what makes their life more, or my life more valuable than theirs? So it
Yeah,
kind of.
it shouldn't be blurred into the gender role thing, which it does get.
Yeah, it should be like, if anything, there should be like, okay, let's both walk towards the opposite edge of the sidewalk, not near the cars, so that way, we're both safe. It just, I don't know. And there's also, yeah, it's, I don't know. But anyway,
I, I
I think.
think
Oh,
it might. Sorry, Ozzy. I just wanted to say real
no,
quick. I
you go
think
ahead. You go ahead.
I think it just might be. It sometimes it's not really intentional. It just might be a way of protecting someone you love. Because, like Sokka had said, I do that with my children. So it's more of protecting them than anything. And I think that often just comes naturally and not something that you literally think about.
Yeah, but you have to ask yourself why in so many cultures are men seen as the protectors of women and the providers of women? Why is it of value in so many cultures?
Well,
Do
I
you
think
think
Is
it's
there?
a
And I mean, I think I have an idea. Well, go ahead. I'm curious.
well, I mean, from the stuff that I've looked at, asking that question, it's that one of the reasons why. Well, first off, the whole hunter gatherer thing is kind of blown out of proportion a little bit there, but the idea was that with children, you brought it up earlier, the woman that can the sex that can rear a child, whether through breastfeeding or whatever, especially like younger children, is going to be the females. Males don't have the ability to do this, obviously. So it became more important for women to protect the child. They did less risky things because there was nothing stopping a woman from going out and be able to hunt or do any of that stuff. It was just that it was a risk that wasn't taken for the sake of the children at the time. So the common idea of like the hunter gatherer with the men being hunters or whatever was not based on the woman not being able to do it, but more that they had a more important role in their society. But as these hunter gatherer tribes settled down, the hunters, their weapons for hunting turned into weapons for protection from other tribes, protection from whatever might attack them there. So there was a natural transition between being a hunter in that role to being a protector, because they already had everything in play. Weapons that were one time used for hunting were now used for protection, and from there, just you saw this natural kind of evolution of the role of the males into this protective role.
I think there's a little more than that. Rape looms very large here. In conditions of war, for instance, where men and women are often separated. Men are off at war, women are sort of left behind taking care of the children, for instance. Rape on a huge scale takes place. It's absolutely terrifying. the frequency and savagery of rape in time of war. I mean, something happens. The male protectors are gone, and the invaders just think nothing of raping women. It seems.
Yeah.
There have been studies on this that are really quite frightening, and this happens in modern times. It's happened in the past. I mean, in antiquity. I mean, what did you do? You invaded people. You killed the men. You killed the children. You raped the women.
Does this
Right?
come from a rational thinking thing, or from like a gene level type thing, like a push for it?
You have to sort of try to imagine our primitive ancestors, right? I mean, here's an opportunity to get some,
Right.
and it might be as primitive as that. I don't think it has anything to do with, oh, this is a conscious plan, right? You can make it into a conscious plan. You can say, hey, it'd be advantageous to kill the men, then we can avail ourselves of the women. But that beggars the question, why are you so interested in availing yourself of the women? Well,
Sure.
that you're thinking with your loins at that point. And so I think, look, men are typically bigger and stronger. So who should rise to the defense of your village or your tribe or your city, right? You're going to choose randomly people, or are you going to choose the biggest and strongest? Well, if you choose the biggest and strongest, invariably you're going to be choosing the man on average, right? And since a lot of women at any given time are going to be pregnant, or be nursing, or be taking care of small children, right away, it just makes sense that the men are going to fall into the role of protectors and defenders and providers. So I don't think that these quaint things that we still have, where I was reared, when you walk with a woman, any woman, you as a male, you walk on the outside of the sidewalk, so that if there's any risk of her being struck by a vehicle or splashed, or something like that, it's going to be you and not her. These values of chivalry and gallantry that have been pickled into us are, of course, cultural, but they come from somewhere. And I think that they come from that primordial concern about who is best suited to physically protect when the risks are things like rape, physical domination, exploitation, literally murder, and stuff like that.
So there is a huge separation between I like my TV, I want to protect my TV as an object rather than the person. That I would do the same thing as like walking down the sidewalk. I would carry my TV away from the sidewalk so I didn't get splashed, kind of scenario. There's a difference between how I treat a person as I would treat that object.
Well,
or is it maybe the same innate drive?
No, I think men have been conditioned, partly through biology and largely through culture. This is reinforced and amplified.
Sure.
To treat women as valuable commodities, more valuable than men themselves.
Sure.
Right. This is a value. Right. We think it's part and parcel of our concept of masculinity that a man will put himself in harm's way. Women and children first. To the lifeboats. Right. I mean, there were on the Titanic. If I'm not mistaken, men were warned off at gunpoint. I seem to remember someone who got shot because he tried to get into a lifeboat when there was still room, but there were women and children who could still go on board. Right. I mean, this is really deep in us, and I think it's amplified by society. But it's amplified by society because I think it harkens back to something very, very deep within us, that the bigger, stronger should protect the physically weaker, right? And of course, it's insulting in a modern context for a woman to be protected this way. A lot of women are insulted. A lot of women are not, by the way. I know a lot of women who think, that's all fine. I don't mind if a man opens a door for me, even though it's quaint as hell,
Right.
because they understand that this is a value, that if a man exhibits these tendencies, it means that in a situation where we are threatened, he will literally endanger himself for my protection, right? So I think that's why a lot of women value this.
I've learned the humbleness of that. Walking with my cane, I've learned the humbleness of that, of the roles like that.
I'm sorry.
Francis, you wanted to add something?
Go. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Ozzy.
Sorry, I wanted to add to something that Ozzy was saying. Now, I didn't say it at the beginning of the show, but amongst some of the quote-unquote labels that I use, not that I identify with, but that I use, is that of a men's rights activist. And part of what some of Ozzy is talking about is a speaking point that many men's rights activists bring up, which is that socially men are treated as disposable utilities. And he's made the point that by walking on the side of the street, by being bigger and stronger, by so on and so forth, we take it for granted that it is the man who will take the brunt of many hits in favor of protecting the women. One of the people often talk about gender roles, and what we're talking about right now, I think, is very important, is that they are based on who we are. A lot of the objections to quote-unquote gender roles from the feminist camp, for example, take the exact opposite point of view, saying, no, 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 this was trained in you. You know, you weren't born this way. This wasn't part of who, this is not part of your physiological makeup. This is nurture, not nature. And thus, if you ever wonder why you see a conflict between some MRIs and some feminists, you'll understand what that basic distinction is. It's the distinction between nurture and nature in modern context.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree completely with that.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that as far as what Ozzy was talking about, that, you know, I think that some things go to the extreme, and there's some things that I think it's just outlandish when it comes to, you know, gender roles and everything. But what Ozzy was speaking about is something that I actually cherish. Like, I appreciate that evolution and our historical process has formed the male to be a protector, and I don't see anything wrong with that. And I get a little bit aggravated when I see extreme feminists making that seem wrong. That's pretty much all I had to say.
Yeah, sure, I agree with that.
I think someone else. I just want to agree with you.
Too.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I don't like being made to feel bad for behaving in the way that feels just like innately just who I am. You know, I don't want to feel like what Eva's saying. If I do feel compelled, even if I'm compelled by my biology, I mean, this is who I am. You know, if I'm compelled by my biology to take on that role of a protector, I don't. You know what I mean? I don't want to be made to feel like there's something wrong with that. You know, even if some people might not like those gender roles.
Well, I was gonna comment on quickly on what Benny said. Is it's so easy, if you don't like that kind of person, don't date them or don't be around them. You know, it's not your duty or job to get people to change who they are to fit your standards. Just don't be around them. It's that easy. But what I was going to say, my little anecdote that I was going to throw in here, relating to the conversation before, was I had a friend that I've had since I was very young. He happened to be male. He got married. I was talking to his wife. Apparently, after my transition, my friend had a few issues with me. He told his wife, I don't know if it's true or not, but from what she told me, this is what he supposedly said to his wife, is that the reason I transitioned was because I couldn't hack it as a man. Yeah. And she relayed this message to me, and I was like, you do realize that your husband just told you that you were lesser than him.
Yeah. That's also really strange. Yeah, that's a strange thing to say, because it's like saying that that men have it so much harder, when many would make the opposite case. Right? Many would make the case that women have it harder. So to say, oh, you can't hack as a man, so go do this easier thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't fathom the mindset of saying something like that.
And it's not, and that's the thing though, is a lot of trans people they have this whole, you know, trannier than thou kind of attitude. Because, you know, and I get put in that category where I'm a lesser, or I'm not as trans as someone else, or I'm not really truly a trans because I have different ideas of what goes on. But the whole idea of, you know, this kind of having to fit certain stereotypes in order to be that. It never, I'm just me, you know. I just want to be me. That's all I want to be. It's not, yeah, I will admit there are certain things I do for the benefit of others, just to not be confusing, because I was in a subway once with my stepfather, and, you know, so I've known him when I was living as a male and as a female, and we're in a subway, and he orders his sandwich first, and then I'm ordering mine after, and he gets to the cashier, and he's like, you know, I'm gonna pay for his too, and the cashier's like, pay for whose? Because she's looking at me like, you know, I don't know him, you know, and he's like his, and points right at me, and I'm like, face palm, because I'm like, Woody, I'm trying to, you know, this is the whole concept of, you know, trying not to confuse people, but now, you know, outing me like that, kind of, this person who really shouldn't be confused about the whole situation is now. So I've always found that kind of funny.
Yeah, it almost seems like a conscious thing. I mean, it's to actually say his, and when you see her, and I don't know, theirs comes to mind a lot easier than pointing out the distinction.
Can I make we had an off-air hangout where this came up like a few days ago, and I think that people sometimes they point to the fact that being trans was considered a mental illness up until I think the mid '90s, when the DSM changed the way that it was I think called gender identity disorder, and they changed it to gender dysphoria, which is now not clinically diagnosed. It's not treated as a psychological illness. And so people sometimes point to that and they say, well, you know, this is how I was raised. I was raised to think of this as an anomaly, as you know, these people are just weird, and, you know, or there's something wrong with them. And I think, you know, whether or not you want to, that's the way you want to look at it. I think the way I would encourage those people to think about it is that these are people who are dealing with something that's really, really hard. It's got to be very challenging, and you'll never understand it, and I'll never understand what they're going through. And I feel like I just want to not do anything to make their lives worse. You know, I don't want to make their lives harder. So I mean, if I'm going to be just one extra person giving them shit for being different, you know, I'd rather not do that. You know. And so, you know, put your feelings aside, or maybe question, you know, why do you have such an emotional attachment to this? You know, question, you know, I think, for me anyway, I'd rather just do good to people. Just try to, you know, follow the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated, or treat others the way that they are likely to want to be treated. You know, try to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and that's the attitude I take.
Yeah, how was the golden rule worded before the Bible? I liked that wording better, and I can't remember who worded it.
Kill them before they kill you?
Yep. Yeah.
It wasn't treat others how you want to be treated, but it was...
Well, Confucius had something similar,
yeah.
but I don't remember.
I like the way his is worded, and I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but I like it wording better, but I agree with you.
We're approaching the end here, so I'm going to let everybody get a chance to you know, get kind of a last word in about what we're going to talk to them about tonight, and anything else that they kind of want to add in or plug. Benny, I'll start with you.
I just pretty much said what I would like to consider my final comments. I think that, you know, just treat people the way that they want to be treated. Just do, what is it, be excellent to each other. Is that the Bill and Ted thing? And that's it. So thanks to everybody who's participating, and thanks again, Soccer, for hosting. It's been another good show.
Yeah, not a problem. Eve.
Yeah, I think this was great, and I think it's a topic that cannot be exhausted. Like, it needs to be talked about a lot more, and I don't think that we covered, you know, near as much as we could, and so I would love to see it brought to the Deeper Than Dogma show again, and I appreciate you having me.
Floyd?
Yeah, I was going to say, because there's so many questions and issues and gray area in the subject of gender roles. I remember growing up, I was very confused about the whole topic. especially I grew up when the feminist movement was taking off, so I thought all those stereotypical ideas of how to treat women was considered somehow disrespectful. That you're treating a woman different than how you would be treated. So the idea of like a knight taking off his cape and laying it down on a puddle for the woman to walk across was somehow demeaning to a woman, that you're calling a woman weak, that she can't walk around the puddle herself and so forth. But it seems like some women want to be treated that way. I still get flack from my wife to this day, where when I proposed to her, I didn't get down on one knee to propose to her, and she wanted that, but I say to her, no one gave me proposal lessons. I didn't know you were supposed to do that. I thought that was some old-fashioned thing that they did years ago. But so I always found the whole thing very, very confusing.
Yeah, I actually had the same thing from my wife, so it's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, sorry, a little slide. Sorry, I know it's a closing statement, but I've been with my wife for about 8 years, and we were already living together. We had our son before we were even engaged, so it wasn't really a surprise. And how do you do that and not make it a surprise? I mean, she picked out her engagement ring, so she knew I had it. So it was like, I'll give it to you in a couple weeks. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I thought it'd be better to work together. Yeah, I did the same thing. My wife and I went to the jewelers together because you think she'd want to be part of it and want to pick out something she actually likes. She has to keep the thing on her finger for the rest of her life. But kind of like the traditional way is to have it ready and surprise her with it and so forth. So I'm always conflicted between doing what's practical and efficient and avoiding cultural relativism, so to speak. I always thought, I'm an intellect. Cultural relativism doesn't apply to me, but somehow, if you don't do those things, it doesn't quite work out that well.
Yeah, I hope she wasn't expecting like a flash mob or something. Yeah, I don't. Never mind. Francis.
I will echo the sentiment that a number of people have made. This conversation is very broad and very deep and very important, and we would need 10 shows to have covered the basics. I'm very pleased to have met everyone here. This is an excellent conversation, and you embody the two rules that I find are essential to not only this conversation but the conversation in general, is be intellectually rigorous, treat people impartially and with dignity. And if we do that, regardless of the situation, we'll make it through.
Thank you very much.
Here.
Jen, thank you very much for, I know that you were a late addition to this. Thank you for being able to just jump in for this, and really happy about that.
Oh, no problem. Anytime. Like I said, I'm a bit awestruck. I mean, it's just so weird to be the outsider watching, and then to actually be a part of it is just it's a completely different breed of dog there. But yeah, I mean, as far as final statements go, just treat people as individuals. Don't try to group them into what you think they are. Find out who they are before you start making assumptions, and treat them as they wish to be treated. I can't really. I mean, it's already been said. So, but yeah, this topic, this is something I've been struggling with for most of my life. It's gotten to the point where, dealing with the I don't want to call them stupid arguments, but yeah, they're pretty much stupid. It's very refreshing to actually have a civil discussion about it with people who aren't oh, well, you're biologically male, therefore you're always going to be a male. Well, yeah, I know that biologically I will always be a male. I'm not arguing that. What I'm arguing is, why can't you just make things easier for everyone and, less confusing like the whole roommate with, poisoning the waters for everyone else when, confusing when you call me he. You're making more problems than there should be, just because you don't accept that I want to be who I am. So if we could just, avoid that and kind of be nice to each other, that'd be wonderful.
I agree. It's a, and then the fact that you have to describe it as, this is something you've been suffering with, or something that you've had to deal with, that's an issue. You shouldn't have to suffer to be who you want to be.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is that I don't suffer so much with my transition. It's my suffering is having to deal with other people,
Mm-hmm.
and their ignorance of the whole situation. So.
Yep. Ozzy.
Well, Jennifer said something that struck me very poignant. She doesn't dispute that she was born male, biologically male, but so what? But the reason it's not just so what for so many people is because, as I said, there are these three strands, these three things: biological sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And in most people, they sort of line up in a convenient and predictable package that's very, very tidy and black and white for most people. There are people in the world who think that this is a natural category, and that the way nature is good. It's a moral evaluation they're making on maleness and femaleness, and that these three things need to line up together. And when someone violates those expectations, they're seen as transgressing the moral order. I think if we can sort of keep in mind that these things don't have to go together, but we don't have to deny the biology. We don't have to become radical constructivists when it comes to sex. We don't have to fall into that it's either nature or it's nurture fallacy. We don't have to make that mistake. Then the discussion can progress a lot better, and we can remind people of what Jennifer just reminded of us, that she was born biologically male. That's never going to change, but that's not the only variable, and that's not it, that's a predictor of the gender identity that a person's going to have, but that's not a final determinant of what a person's gender identity is going to be. It seems entirely possible to make progress in this, and I think one way to make progress in this is for people like Jennifer to be more visible and more vocal. I really liked your contribution here tonight, Jennifer. I hope you'll participate in more of these, because one of the things that has happened with this whole business about Caitlyn Jenner that's sort of driving people crazy is that people are talking about this, and there are people who want to insist that these categories, these all line up very neatly, and they don't want to be reminded that it's more complicated, and they don't want people thinking it's more complicated, because one way to make people think that it's tidy is for them to never consider that it's not tidy. And so I think exposure and visibility and having a voice in these matters is really important. So I hope you'll come back. I hope you'll have more to say on these things. And anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. I really appreciated your participation, and thank you for having me on this. I think it's a really important topic.
If I can just throw in that I would love to come back anytime you guys want me to. Most of you I don't have in my circles, so I'm going to add you guys if you don't mind that. And then anytime you want to, feel free to invite me.
Sure,
Awesome.
absolutely.
Yeah, same here.
Xbox.
Yeah, I've enjoyed meeting both you and Jennifer and Francis. From this experience, y'all are welcome anytime. And I start off by apologizing to interrupting so much. I'm working on that, on jumping on the end of people's sentences. But I think Benny made a good point. I'm glad you brought this into our attention, at bringing this topic up. We've got to start somewhere. And we've brought up things as slavery, gender issues. Some of these things, like Ozzy was just saying as well, we need to talk a little deeper on these. We would like it to be just a machine we can throw things into and spit out the right answers, but we don't always work that way. And I'm glad we're discussing these things. So, and for anybody, I'll put the after show link down below once we start it up in the comments.
All right. Thanks again. Yeah. So we will be doing the after show again. for anyone that doesn't know, the reason why we do the after show is that we like to have just kind of a, we don't want to stretch these on for 8-hour hangouts, and unfortunately I prefer to have kind of a set panel, or for the night, discuss the topic for 90 minutes or so, just hash all we can here, and then anyone that feels like contributing or jumping in, whatever, we run them on Xbox's channel, and those ones will generally run for as long as they can, on various various topics, whatever you want to talk about there. So feel free to watch that on Xbox's channel. Jump in once the link's made public. Thanks to everybody for coming in. Yeah, right. You just did it again.
Because I love you.
And Mark Inoya put it in the chat for here. It was from Confucius. It was, do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself. I'll just point it out there, and I'll leave it at that. And good night to everybody, and thanks for coming in and watching. Bye.
Good night.